All right. Welcome, everybody, to the January 13th, 2021. Ah, man, happened. I knew it was going to happen there. 2021 community meeting. It's embarrassing. At least they don't write checks anymore. Well, maybe some people do. No offense to people who still do. Um, but that used to be a thing. You have to remember to do your checks right.
What they're talking about is still 2020.
Yeah, it feels like it, right? So yeah, welcome everyone. We are the main thing is just I want to give some updates on the Electron work that we've been doing, and say thank you to Sam along the way, and we've been slowly moving this forward, and it's been a bit of a process, but we are it's getting close now. So one of the things that's on here right now is this 1822 issue, which was merged in just the other day. That came in through a PR from Fabrice. Thank you. We were able to get that merged in, which means that when we do get to having our Electron build, it will work on M1. So, well, allegedly, I don't think we actually have a thing to test it with. So I'm assuming that Fabrice, after this merge, tested it and it worked for them. So hopefully that means it does work. Maybe that's a good excuse to get the company to send me an M1 laptop is the requirement for testing Octant. The next thing up there was the auto updates. Yeah, so there was a conversation that happened around this that Sam brought up. I believe it was in our stand up when we were talking about what was left to do for Electron. And I think we just want to call out here that the first pass of auto update is going to be the system is going to download the new binary and then it's going to restart itself, right? Like you see with a lot of other applications, where you won't just get the banner that flashes and says, "Hey, congratulations, we've updated. You're on a new version." It will be a prompt to say, "Click here, it'll download, you restart, and you'll be on the latest version." That's going to be our first pass of auto update, and then after that, we will continue to explore more what it means to do partial updates. Just the way we've decided to package the things together for the first release of the Electron application, uh, and also just the time investment. We don't really have the time to fully explore like a very a nicely crafted and well thought out partial update uh, functionality. So we're going to kind of they'll be auto updating, but it will be download the latest and restart, which is still a big step in the right direction and will be useful to folks. So, was there anything that you wanted to? I should have let Sam talk about that. I think he was the one who wrote this, so I'm sorry.
No, that I covered it nicely. The default setting for checking for auto updates is once every 20 minutes, and that's kind of standard in the Electron space. And I don't think that's I mean, it could be a user-enabled toggle, but in this case, it probably is trivial to just essentially curl once every 20 minutes somewhere. So yes, and the partial updates, they use this thing called a block map file, and we're just excluding that from our builds altogether. And it's super nice too. It works out on our end because it reduces build time significantly for whatever reason. And I guess on the next line, interoperability between multiple release tools to a single tag. So this is something that we're just building essentially a giant Rube Goldberg machine with. So we've got Electron Builder and we've got Go Releaser. Go Releaser is for our Go binaries, and now we're using Electron Builder. And both of these have their own publish semantics, and they both want to push to GitHub directly, and we do not want to do that. So essentially, we need to create our own bucket and then upload that all together at once as a single final tag with our own machinery. And that's just going to take a little bit of work on our part. It'd be kind of cool if there was some tooling already in this space, like some sort of universal artifact publisher, but maybe that's not a real thing. could be fun for a side project in case anyone listens to this and feels like, yes, that's what open source needs right now.
Yeah, and just to highlight what Sam's talking about, so Sam did some work that does push up the latest Electron build as well as the server binary. You can see here it currently gets pushed up as like two separate uh, labels, tags, whatever, releases. It's the same tag, but a different tag actually. One's V17 and one's O17. So it's pushed up as two separate. What we're doing is working to merge those together, so that it's all the way people expect it to be, and all rolled up into one spot. And these are the block map files that Sam was referencing that'll go away. So yeah, I think that.
So I have a question. Sam, you mentioned we're going to check every 20 minutes. I assume we're going to check on startup as well, right?
Yeah, I'd assume it checks on startup.
Cool.
It's in the Electron docs. Like this should be like it's abstracted away. Like we don't even like it's
Awesome.
just like on app const app update or whatever.
Cool. Good to know.
Yeah, and then there's a project board which I pulled up briefly there for a second, but I can show it again. It's our O17, and we're tracking these things. It looks very similar to the last time we showed it. These two issues, 1479 and 1480, are the ones that were kind of Sam and I have been circling around, making progress on. So once those are in place, that will mean that the ability to easily build and run an Electron application from our build.go file will be in place, as well as all of the actions to support releasing the Electron binary via our release pipeline, and publishing that up into our nightly binaries, so people will be able to start grabbing the nightly of the Electron build. That's kind of like foundation work to then allow the rest of these to. We've really been just hyper focused on getting that stuff done, getting this pipeline and tooling work done, so that we can then address and burn down the rest of the issues for the O17 sprint, what we've decided is kind of a requirement for Electron. And we do have a separate project, which is just Electron application. This has more of the Electron work in it. I think there's like three or four stories in here that are also in O17, but that will likely come later, but they are related to things we want to do once Electron's in place. So expect to see this into the Electron build in the nightlies very soon. And once that's there, then that's going to be the primary mode of operating Octant for the dev team, which will then allow us to really start to address all of the outstanding work. So that kind of updates where Electron is at and where the project's at, and why it feels like not much is going on is because in the forward-facing part of things, there isn't much going on. It's all back-end work and pipeline and infrastructure stuff. So there is, however, work happening through the design work that is going on with Resource Viewer. We showed and shared some of that a couple meetings ago, and I just wanted to, I don't know if we have a discussion around it, but I wanted to call out that Milan and Isha have been working extensively on kind of redesigning and retooling and thinking about redesigning and structuring kind of like how the Resource Viewer. There's like two pieces. There's like the look and feel of Resource Viewer, but then there's the actual implementation and like what is important, how things are drawn, so there's two scopes of work kind of happening, and one is a much like deeper, heavily invested scope of work, and the other one's a more of like, hey, let's clean up some things we know about. So I don't know if Isha or Milan want to add more to that, but I do know there's some issues being created and some work happening around that.
Yeah, I think, we shared the current design and progress previously. So we're just currently moving forward with that and trying to finalize design and trying to start working on some prototypes soon inside the storybook. So that's pretty exciting. I'm happy that we get a really good second take on this that will hopefully improve the user experience and make a resource viewer more, not only like a display element, but more navigation element, and show little richer information for the end user. I don't know, Isha, Pia, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I think what we're hoping to do is like build it in code in Storybook, and then maybe get some like better feedback if users are able to actually like use the resource viewer and click on it and see how it works, and then we can test it against different data sets and see how it comes out. So we're in the process of that. I think right now we're still thinking about the design that we want to build in the prototype, but hopefully next week we can, once we like solidify on that, we can share that out in the community meeting.
Awesome. Thank you. So before I move on, was there any, going to go to open Q&A. I just added a thing there, but unless there's anything else from anyone.
I wanted to add a few things. So just wanted to share that we're also working on improving the plugin author experience. And we have a good set of plugin authors to interview, but if there's anyone else in the community who'd like to be interviewed, please reach out to me or Isha or any of us in the Octant channel. I also wanted to share that it's OS Day week. I don't know why they call it OS Day if it's multiple days, but anyways, it's OS Day week here at VMware. So I've been going to that, and I'm happy to say that already the session I went to, Octant, was highlighted as a healthy project for responding to PRs 90% of the time within 2 business days. So I'm excited to share that. And I'm going to continue going to the other sessions to learn more from many of the open source teams within VMware, such as Valero and RabbitMQ and many others.
I just posted a link in the chat where you can sign up for some of the talks for the VMware OSS community days. Wayne, maybe you can add that to the notes, or I can add it.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, it's actually going for 2 weeks.
2 weeks. OS Open Source
Yes.
Day for 2 weeks.
I've been listening to a couple of sessions. It's pretty good. Joe Beda was in this morning.
Awesome. Oh, cool. Yeah, thanks for putting that in there, Isha. All right. So moving on to open Q&A, I just added a couple items that I wanted to discuss quickly, just kind of to get people's, at least like start to, oh, actually I see there's a question from the YouTube stream. I'll add it to the list and we'll answer that one first. So Reginald had a question, and it says that the Great Tech, it chews a lot of CPU when idle. Is that being addressed? So I would say no, because I don't know if that's a common problem. So Reginald, I would encourage you to open an issue with like your platform and any log output that you have. That can be really helpful. I do know that in the case when Octant is in a RBAC restricted environment or is failing to look up certain resources within the cluster, what can happen is that it causes it to log very verbosely to the console, which can then result in high CPU output because the poller that's running with Octant is running every second. And so then the result is that you get either one or like 1 plus n log lines for certain errors into the console every second. And that can result in high CPU when you're just kind of not doing anything. So I would encourage you to open an issue so that we can take a further look into that and see specifically why you're running into that. All right. Did anyone want to add anything to that, Sam or Milan? Have you all experienced that?
Yeah, and this is just tricky in general, simply because we don't really have any type of benchmarking or even type of any type of automation that kind of checks for this. So really, it's a lot of times it's when we run it and just based off of intuition and our devices. And I know that sounds awful from a software development standpoint, but it's something we can improve upon, and and there are stuff we can also check, like at compile time, like to check for go routine leaks. I think that was discussed a while back ago. But if you have a specific scenario of using Octant that causes a high CPU usage, we are absolutely interested in knowing what causes that.
Yeah, and I would add to that. I would say like if it starts up fine, seems to be fine while you're using it, and then it's idle and then it spikes, like that's all, like just like how it manifests itself when it seems to happen. All of that is useful information in helping us kind of determine what might be the root cause. Since that's like Sam was saying, it's kind of one of those we don't know until we know. So yeah, hopefully we can get that figured out for you. Thanks for using Octant and asking about that. All right, moving on to my question. So listing resources from a cluster, that is a very generic, wide open question. Specifically, this comes up. There's a couple things that we're doing when we pull and list resources from a cluster, and one of them is we do a has access check, which I've talked about before, and I have an old branch that is probably well past its ability to serve as anything useful. But there's a subject access branch which kind of removes this has access and uses subject access to list resources, and it is much faster. There's also some work around doing a like using the local disk to act as a client cache for the discovery client, which we use to then create informers, or the dynamic client, which we then use to create informers. This is work that has happened independently of Octant in other projects and side efforts, and so that's something we want. I just wanted to bring up. And then the other thing is when we are in RBAC restricted environments, we have some difficult times like listing resources in a way that is consistent and predictable, and like the failure cases of like when you can and cannot see things, even with our has access checks, are interesting and aren't reliable in a way that we can say like, yes, this will run in your environment, or no, it won't, or it should degrade nicely. Anyway, so the reason I'm bringing all this up is I'm going to open a discussion on our GitHub discussions, and specifically around like kind of revisiting and rethinking how we do listing of resources from a cluster. Like what we've done now is just like, hey, use client go, discovery client, dynamic client, cluster client, go get stuff, bring it in, right? And that does work, and we'll still need to use those APIs at a low level, but I think there's probably a better abstraction we can create around once we get that, like, first off, failing gracefully when we make an API call and it doesn't allow us to, like we get access denied or something like that. Um, we ideally, like, instead of this pre-check where we ask for permission, we would have a really graceful way to get forgiveness. And then the other piece to this is, just because the Kubernetes API gives us these things in a certain way, it doesn't mean that that is the way that we must hold them. Our object store, our dynamic cache, is already kind of doing this, where we kind of store them in a format that we want, so that we can, they're cached, and we can go in and fetch them easily and pull them out of the store, um and maybe like, and it's very, right now that abstraction is kind of mapped one-to-one to like a GVK, or yeah, to GVKs, I think. And we may benefit from creating a data model internally, like in memory, where we store this, that is more like the model that we generate for the resource viewer, right? Like, imagine we went and we collect all this information about the cluster, and then we put it into a graph by default, right? And then now we are exploring the graph, and we're doing like GraphQL, to get objects and data out of it. And then there's still an informer sitting with a cache that's kind of updating this stuff, but then drawing out relationships and adding in extra context on those relationships and doing all those, they become uh like natural to the system, instead of right now it's like a very foreign to the system thing, where we're like, we take this data, we pass it through the resource viewer, it generates a graph, then we have this graph, now we go back to Kubernetes to try and add context to the graph, right? Well, what if the root of the data store was already the graph? Is something I'm thinking about, and for just kind of long term, for like the direction we want to take resource viewer and like some of the screens we've shown. I think we have to kind of potentially think about a different way to store our data. Maybe not.
Yeah, I would love to see that. Maybe it doesn't have to be graph. Maybe it could be just the different data structures used
Sure.
to represent the data. But it would be really good to kind of move that one level away from the Kubernetes view of things, and maybe make it a little easier accessible and a little easier to gather the information for the resource viewer, and not only for the resource viewer, for all parts of the system. I know when I was there trying to add something for the resource viewer, I mean, I wouldn't say it was hard, but it was not ideal, and it would be really nice if that information is structured slightly differently.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was just throwing it out there as something to think about, and something I've been thinking about. And like, I think there's there's a list of problems that we run up against with our current approach that need to be solved. But then there's also just like, how do we um like, can we do it better, right? Can we just do it better, knowing what we know, knowing how we want to display the data? Can we do it better?
Yes. So I just want to share, my view of the resource viewer is, I would definitely like to see it to be a map of your Kubernetes cluster. And that map includes everything. So if you think about a map, like a traditional map, you can have different levels of zoom, you can have filters, you can have, so as long as we have that map, it would be pretty easy for us to say, okay, so I want to focus on this part of the map. I just want to see this deployment, and maybe filter it by some labels and things like that. But at the end of the day, it's still just a different view into the same map. So if we can find a good way to represent that map to the data structures on the backend side, I think that would be awesome.
Yeah. Reginald asked another question that I wanted to answer. Has anyone run Octant as a container and exposed it as a service? Yes, people have done that. It isn't supported. Octant is the only official mechanism for Octant is running locally as an application. And the reason this is the case is due to, well, one of the big reasons is due to the global context and the way we load config files and the assumptions that we make of where Octant is running. We can do it. We get a lot of benefit from being able to assume that Octant is running on a local machine and not in a deployed environment, around like reliability and like what we can do with it. Uh, so that is why we haven't really explored that avenue of like making it something that, like, giving first class support to it running as a service. People have done it. People have used config maps to expose the settings and get it working. But and that is an issue that we have open in our backlog for potentially like long term or down the road. But in the short term, it's we just don't have the team size to really do both well. We just kind of have the team to do one well. So that's what we're focused on is the application side. And so the other question that I put in here was the web components and custom components. This has come up. Some folks are writing a plugin and we're asking about this, and it's come up before. It's in our backlog. It's a thing that we've been asked about before and have talked about before. And I like the idea, but I am actually I'm I'm struggling mostly to understand exactly what, like, the why and the benefit and the how, like, less the how, more the why and the benefit of, like, what do people who want this, why do they want it? And maybe this is something that Pia can find out during the plugin author interviews, of like, is that something that would interest you? How do you see yourself using a custom component? What is the, like, why a custom component instead of making modifications or creating a new upstream component? Like, and one of the things that I think all of us have said before is specifically around like charts and graphs. I can definitely see there's so many different ways to draw charts. There's so many different ways to draw graphs. There's so many different libraries and options, open source, commercial ones, whatever. So that is the main thing that I could see a custom component being used for is an easy way to get your custom charts and graphs rendering in Octant without Octant needing to support some set of chart and graph libraries. But beyond that, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what else you'd use it for.
Yeah, I mean, user interface is pretty complex, and the amount of use cases is pretty much infinite. So I kind of understand why people want to put different things in, and I feel that at some point we should provide a little better support for the web components. But I mean, even now, I think if you are working with a TypeScript plugin, you should be able to add as long as you gather all the data on all the information you need, you should be able to add any component you want to your plugin, if that's what we are talking about, and I assume we are. So but at some point maybe we should make like a custom components, like a first class citizen, and providing a little bit of interface. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. I in my head I think of it as being something like there's some type of web view component or something like that, and it creates a shadow DOM and then anything that's defined in there gets loaded into it and renders with its own, so you can have script and head tags and things that go out and fetch in these CSS and JavaScript resources and just load it, and it's like a read-only isolated shell from Octant. That's, I guess, to me that would be like the step one would be like to create it as like this read-only view, and then from there figure out like what do interactions, like reactive patterns, look like in that world. So I'll open a discussion around this. I think it would be useful to start collecting that information, and we can take like the stuff that Pia finds when talking to plugin authors and add it to the discussion as well, and just have a good place to maybe so when people are searching for this or it comes up, there's a place to point people to, and they can add their opinions and thoughts.
Yeah, we'll definitely ask about that in our interviews. But I'm also wondering how much of it is like an awareness issue. Like Milan was saying, like this can be done in TypeScript, but how familiar are people with like being able to create these components in TypeScript, or knowing that like, oh, if I choose to do a TypeScript plugin over a Go plugin, I'll have this flexibility or capability. So that's one thing to think about too.
Yeah, they can't do it now, even if they're using the TypeScript plugin.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I think he was saying ideally you would be able to, because it's like that same declarative syntax that people are used to. But right now there is no way to put your own custom stuff up there, except for there's the take a text component, flag it as markdown, flag it as secure content, and then you can basically free render HTML. I don't recommend that, but you can do it. It's actually fine as long as the HTML is not informed by a remote source. If it's all just static HTML, then there's no security concern.
I'm also interested with these web components if the requests are really just out of demand for some sort of graph, like typically like sort of like graphing library, like for example, people want histograms, line charts, and things of that nature. And they're like, oh, you don't have that, but if we had web components, we could implement it. Or like, I'm wondering if we're missing a certain class of components as opposed to just actually needing to build out this system of web components and custom components really well. And that is something we probably want to clarify, because it's much harder to get web components right, and it's a lot less work to implement a new component.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Sam. I agree with you. It is, yeah, doing a new component. I think that would be like, we as a team, we want to research and decide what graph library we want to use and what chart library we want to use, right? Like, and I don't know if there's already one that's kind of like the de facto standard for open source projects at VMware or not, but if there is one, yeah, finding out if it's just a matter of like, if those existed, then I don't need a custom web component. I think that would be useful as well.
I built a few of those, so can definitely help. Yeah.
Do you know if there's one at VMware that's?
No, there's no standard in VMware. I mean, the one we built, the one I think most of you know that before working on Octant, I was working on actually data visualization library inside the Pivotal, and that was used in both HealthWatch and AppMatrix. That was Pivotal. products. But unfortunately, at some point, the observability team decided to move towards using Grafana internally. So that there's still open source library that's actually really good. Fortunately, in React. I mean, maybe you can try to find a way to use it and kind of open source it a little more than it is right now, because it's publicly available, but not completely open source. It's kind of totally different issue. But there are some other solutions too, and there's a lot of good libraries out there. Most of them D3 based. What we did in our case is we didn't want to invent the hot water. We basically just decided we're gonna find a really good library out there and build on top of it, and mostly like features that are important for observability, downsampling, support for PromptQL and different standards, and making specific charts that are interesting for monitoring and observability. So not only we provided good charts, but also some mechanism and recommendations, which, for example, for latency, you don't want to use bar chart for latency, right? There are different ways of doing that. So it's a very complex space, and there's a lot of variables there. But if you feel that we should develop our own chart, I definitely like to see that happening, because I think it would improve a lot user experience in Octant, especially like, small things like a Spark charts might be interested when you look at the pods and how they behave as a CPU. You can even display like Spark chart inside the, maybe even inside the resource viewer, show a little chart showing how the CPU was behaving recently. So things like that. Sorry, if I start talking about charts, I can't stop, so I better stop myself right here.
I wanted to pull up a little, so there's like Ngx Charts, which I think is a pretty well-known Angular chart library. But I agree. Right. Yeah, I wanted to pull this up just because, like, I do agree. Like, I think there's a lot of things in here that like could be made part of, that could make the Octant UI better, right? The overall, or the UX, the overall user experience better by having them as components that are part of the user interface. And just like you're like these like spark lines, right? Like things that you were saying.
Exactly.
Yeah, like heat maps and polar charts and things. Like you can give a lot of information in a small space with some of these charts, more than just like the verbosity of a table and text. So yeah, I think that's something we want to explore.
Exactly.
Maybe along the line. I think I like what Sam was saying about just like, extending our components so that we have more charts, right? And just like finding areas, like maybe we can work with Isha to find areas in the current like user interface where, like, hey, if this was this kind of chart, this is what it might look like, and then use that to drive like, okay, what charts are we going to implement? Because like, right, even just the donut chart, which we've done, folks already use it, right? They already use it. They already want to extend it. They already want to make it better. So I think just getting more in there, we would see. I know that like the Jenkins X plugin would probably take advantage of a lot of different charts if we put them in place. Showing builds and like stacked information and things like that. So I like that idea. Something to think about once we start working on stuff after the Electron.
Yeah, and in the same time, I don't think we should go too deep, like, move into like Prometheus Grafana territory or Wavefront or things like that. But, maybe we can provide interfaces for those packages, but I think it would be good to provide just out of the box Octant experience where you can see, for example, when you open the Octant in the morning, you can see how my CPU was going on last 24 hours with a single chart at a glance. So even simple things like that, I think, would go a long way to improve the user experience.
Yep, I agree. So yeah, that's all I had. Let me check and make sure there's no other questions. Did anyone else have anything to add before we call it? I'll take that as a no. All right. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it as always. And we will see you next week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.